The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Riverside Music Academy, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Students rushed through the hallways, their excitement filling the air with nervous chatter. Today was different. Today the academy was hosting a special workshop, and everyone knew what that meant. Vincent Park was coming. At 30 years old, Vincent had already made a name for himself in the classical music world. He had performed in concert halls across Europe and Asia. Critics praised his technical perfection. Music magazines featured him on their covers. And he knew it. Vincent carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Someone who believed his success was entirely his own doing. The Academy's director, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, had spent months convincing Vincent to lead this workshop. She wanted him to work with a diverse group of students, young pianists who didn't always get opportunities like this. Some came from small towns. Others had learned to play on old, out-of-tune pianos in community centers. But they all shared one thing: a deep love for music. Vincent had agreed, though not enthusiastically. He saw it as a favor, something to add to his resume. Teaching wasn't really his passion. Performing was. Still, he showed up that morning wearing an expensive suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the successful artist he believed himself to be. The workshop was scheduled to begin at 10. By 9:45, most students had already gathered in the main concert hall. They sat in rows of chairs, their eyes fixed on the beautiful grand piano at the center of the stage. Some whispered to each other, sharing their nervousness. Others sat in silence, lost in their own thoughts. Vincent entered through a side door, barely acknowledging the students. He walked straight to the piano, ran his fingers across the keys without sitting down, and nodded approvingly. Mrs. Patterson followed behind him, slightly out of breath from trying to keep up. "They're all here," she said softly. 15 talented young people. I think you'll be impressed." Vincent gave a thin smile. "We'll see." At exactly 10 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson stepped onto the stage. She welcomed everyone and spoke about the importance of dedication and hard work in music. Then she introduced Vincent, listing his achievements and performances. The students applauded politely. Vincent took the microphone. "Thank you for that introduction," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "I'm here today because Mrs. Patterson believes you all have potential. I'm not as easily convinced. Music isn't just about loving to play. It's about discipline, natural talent, and years of proper training. Not everyone who wants to be a pianist should be one." The room went quiet. Some students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the inspirational speech they had expected. "We'll go through each of you today," Vincent continued. "You'll play something for me and I'll give you honest feedback. Real feedback. Not the kind that makes you feel good but doesn't help you improve." Mrs. Patterson looked concerned but didn't interrupt. She knew Vincent's reputation for being blunt, but she hadn't expected him to be quite this harsh right from the start. The first few students performed. Vincent listened with his arms crossed, occasionally stopping them mid-piece to point out mistakes. His comments were technical and cold. "Your fingering is wrong here. You're rushing the tempo. That interpretation is too sentimental." Some students nodded, trying to absorb the criticism. Others looked close to tears. Around noon, Mrs. Patterson announced a short break. Students filed out of the hall, some heading to the cafeteria, others gathering in small groups to decompress. Vincent remained by the piano, scrolling through his phone. "You're being quite hard on them," Mrs. Patterson said gently, approaching him. "I'm being honest," Vincent replied without looking up. "If they can't handle criticism, they won't survive in this field." "There's a difference between constructive criticism and discouragement." Vincent finally looked at her. "Mrs. Patterson, you asked me here to evaluate talent. That's what I'm doing. I'm not here to be their cheerleader." She sighed but said nothing more. She had one more student to introduce after the break, and she was already worried about how Vincent would react. When everyone returned, Mrs. Patterson walked to the center of the stage. "We have one more performer today," she announced. "Her name is Maya Chen. She's 17 and has been playing piano for 13 years. There was a pause, and then the side door opened. A young woman entered, guided by a golden retriever in a service vest. Maya moved slowly but confidently, one hand lightly touching the dog's harness. She wore a simple blue dress and her long dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes, though open, didn't focus on anything in particular. Vincent's expression changed immediately. His eyebrows rose and he glanced at Mrs. Patterson with clear disapproval. Several students whispered to each other. Maya and her guide dog made their way to the stage. Mrs. Patterson helped her navigate the steps, and the dog settled calmly beside the piano bench. Maya's fingers found the edge of the bench and she sat down gracefully. Maya has been blind since she was 7, Mrs. Patterson said to the room, but that hasn't stopped her from pursuing her love of music. She's here today because she earned her spot just like everyone else. Vincent stood up from where he'd been sitting. Mrs. Patterson, can I speak with you for a moment? His voice was tight, controlled. Of course. She walked over to him, and they spoke in low voices near the side of the stage, though their words carried enough for people to hear. This is a serious music academy, Vincent said. I understand wanting to be inclusive, but this workshop is about identifying real talent, people who could actually have careers in classical music. Maya is talented, Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. She wouldn't be here otherwise. How can she even read the music? Does she have someone telling her the notes? She reads Braille sheet music and she has an exceptional musical memory. Vincent shook his head. This isn't about being kind or inspiring. Classical piano requires sight reading, the ability to quickly learn new pieces, to see the conductor in an orchestra. I'm not trying to be cruel, but there are practical limitations. Mrs. Patterson's voice grew firmer. You said you would evaluate each student fairly based on what you hear. So listen to her play. I don't think this is appropriate. Listen to her play, Mrs. Patterson repeated, cutting him off. The room had gone completely silent. Every student could sense the tension. Maya sat at the piano, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm but her jaw slightly tight. She could hear every word. Vincent looked at Maya, then back at Mrs. Patterson. Finally, he walked toward the piano, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. All right, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Since we're doing this, let's make it count. If you're going to take up time in this workshop, you need to prove you belong here. He paused, thinking. Play something technically challenging. Something that shows real skill, not just feeling. He was testing her, and everyone knew it. This wasn't about evaluation anymore. This was about proving a point. Maya turned her face toward his voice. What would you like me to play? She asked quietly. Vincent crossed his arms. Chopin's Etude in C-sharp minor. Do you know it? Several students gasped. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire, requiring incredible speed and precision. Even experienced pianists struggled with it. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. I know it. Vincent stepped back, a slight smirk on his face. He had made his point. Now everyone would see that inspiration and reality were two different things. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out nothing. She didn't need sheet music. Her hands found the keys, her fingers settling into position. She took one deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling, and then she began to play. The first notes came softly, almost hesitantly. Maya's fingers moved across the keys with careful precision, finding each note as if she were greeting an old friend. The opening measures of Chopin's Etude filled the concert hall, and for a moment Vincent's smirk remained fixed on his face. He had heard this piece performed hundreds of times. He had played it himself in competitions, in recitals, in practice sessions that stretched late into the night. He knew every measure, every technical challenge, every place where pianists typically struggled, and he was waiting for Maya to stumble. But then something shifted. As the piece moved beyond the introduction, Maya's playing began to accelerate. Her hands started moving faster, much faster, dancing across the keyboard with a fluidity that seemed almost impossible. The rapid passages that made this etude famous began to pour out of the piano, each note crystal clear and perfectly articulated. Vincent's smirk faded. His arms, which had been crossed confidently across his chest, slowly dropped to his sides. He took a step closer to the piano, his eyes fixed on Maya's hands. Around the room, students sat frozen in their seats. Some leaned forward, their mouths slightly open. Others gripped the armrests of their chairs. The piece was notoriously difficult, requiring the pianist to play complex chromatic runs at tremendous speed while maintaining perfect clarity. Many professional pianists avoided it. Yet here was this blind 17-year-old girl, playing it as if she had been born to do so. But it wasn't just the technical skill that caught everyone's attention. It was something else, something deeper. Maya wasn't just playing the notes correctly. She was telling a story with them. Each phrase had meaning, each dynamic change served a purpose. Where Vincent had always approached this piece as a showcase of speed and precision, Maya played it with emotion that made it feel entirely new. Her body swayed slightly with the music, moving with the rises and falls of the melody. Her face showed complete concentration, but also something like joy. She wasn't performing for the audience or trying to prove anything. She was lost in the music itself, having a conversation with Chopin across the centuries. Mrs. Patterson stood near the back of the hall, her hand covering her mouth. Tears had begun streaming down her face. She had known Maya was talented, but even she hadn't expected this. Vincent couldn't move. His analytical mind, trained to pick apart performances and find flaws, was struggling to process what he was hearing. Technically, it was nearly perfect. But more than that, it was musical in a way that transcended technique. It had soul. The piece built toward its climactic sections, and Maya's playing grew more intense. Her fingers flew across the keys, executing passages that looked physically impossible. The sound filled every corner of the concert hall, powerful and commanding. Even her guide dog, lying beside the piano bench, seemed to sense the importance of the moment, remaining perfectly still. As the etude reached its thunderous conclusion, Maya's hands lifted from the keys with elegant precision. The final chord resonated through the hall, hanging in the air for what felt like forever. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The moment felt suspended in time, as if the entire room was afraid to break whatever spell Maya had cast with her playing. Then, slowly, someone in the back row began to clap. Another person joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted in applause. Students jumped to their feet, some wiping tears from their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The sound was deafening. Maya sat at the piano, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the audience, though she couldn't see them. A small, modest smile crossed her lips. She hadn't expected this reaction. She had simply played the piece the way she felt it should be played. Vincent stood motionless at the side of the stage. While everyone around him applauded and cheered, he remained frozen, his face pale, his expression unreadable. His hands hung at his sides. He looked like someone who had just witnessed something that challenged everything he believed. Mrs. Patterson was the first to approach the piano. She gently touched Maya's shoulder. "That was extraordinary," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely extraordinary." Maya stood up slowly, one hand finding her guide dog's harness. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I was nervous about the tempo in the middle section. I think I might have rushed it slightly." This comment made several people in the audience laugh through their tears. Here was a girl who had just delivered a performance that would be talked about for years, and she was worried about a minor tempo variation that probably nobody else had even noticed. The applause continued for what felt like several minutes. Students came forward wanting to meet Maya, to shake her hand, to tell her how moved they had been. Some asked questions about how she learned the piece, how she memorized such complex music. Maya answered each question patiently, her humble demeanor never changing despite the overwhelming praise. Through it all, Vincent hadn't moved. He stood in the same spot, watching the scene unfold as if he were viewing it from far away. His mind was racing, replaying what he had just heard, trying to reconcile it with his earlier dismissiveness. Finally, Mrs. Patterson noticed him standing alone. She excused herself from the group of students surrounding Maya and walked over to him. "Well," she said simply, her tone neutral but her eyes challenging. Vincent opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. He looked at the floor, then back at Maya, who was now laughing at something one of the other students had said. Her guide dog's tail was wagging, picking up on the joy around them. Vincent started, then stopped. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time that day. "I don't understand." "What don't you understand?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "How did she—" He gestured vaguely toward the piano. "That piece requires seeing the keyboard, planning hand positions, visual memory of the patterns. How can someone play it like that without sight?" Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "Maybe that's the wrong question," she said. "Maybe the question isn't how she plays without sight. but what she hears and feels that the rest of us miss. Vincent looked at her confused. What do you mean? You play with your eyes, Vincent. You always have. You see the notes on the page. You watch your hands on the keys. You look at the audience. But Maya has no choice. She has to play with her ears, her memory, her heart. She has to understand the music on a level that goes beyond visual. She has to live inside it. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "She played it better than I do." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, and saying it out loud seemed to physically pain him. Mrs. Patterson didn't respond immediately. She let those words hang in the air between them. Finally she said, "Talent comes in many forms. Maybe it's time you opened your mind to possibilities you hadn't considered." With that, she walked back to the group of students, leaving Vincent alone with his thoughts. He stood there for several more minutes, watching Maya interact with her fellow students. She was teaching one of them a technique for memorizing complex passages, explaining how she created mental maps of the keyboard. Her passion for music was evident in every word, every gesture. This wasn't someone who played piano despite being blind. This was someone who had found a way to connect with music that most people, including Vincent, never would. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Vincent began walking toward the piano. Students parted to let him through, and suddenly it was just him and Maya, standing face to face. Well, she was facing slightly to the left of him, but close enough. "Maya," he said, and his voice sounded different now, smaller somehow, less certain. She turned her head toward his voice. "Yes, Mr. Park?" Vincent swallowed hard. He had prepared to say something, but now that the moment was here, the words felt inadequate. Still, he had to try. He paused, searching for the right words. "I need to apologize." Maya tilted her head slightly, waiting for Vincent to continue. The other students had gone quiet again, sensing that something important was about to happen. Even the afternoon light streaming through the windows seemed to pause, casting everything in a golden glow. Vincent cleared his throat. "I need to apologize," he repeated. "What I said earlier about you not belonging here, about practical limitations." He trailed off, struggling to find the words. "I was wrong. Completely wrong." Maya's expression didn't change much, but there was a slight softening around her eyes. "Thank you for saying that," she said simply. "No, you don't understand." Vincent took a step closer. "I've been playing piano my entire life. I've studied with the best teachers, performed in the best concert halls. But what you just did?" He shook his head in disbelief. "I've never heard that piece played with such depth. How long did it take you to learn it?" Maya thought for a moment. "About 3 weeks, I think. Maybe a month." Vincent's eyes widened. "A month? That piece took me 6 months to master, and I'm still not sure I truly understand it the way you do." "It's not about time," Maya said gently. "It's about listening. Really listening." Vincent pulled up a chair and sat down, and for the first time that day, he didn't look like the confident, successful pianist everyone had been intimidated by. He looked like a student eager to learn. "Will you explain that to me? How you approach a piece like that?" Maya smiled and sat back down at the piano bench, her guide dog shifting slightly to stay close. "Well, when I first get a new piece, I don't have sheet music like you do. My teacher records herself playing it very slowly, or we work through it section by section. I listen to the recording over and over, not just hearing the notes, but feeling the spaces between them." "The spaces?" Vincent asked. "The silences matter just as much as the sounds," Maya explained. "When you can see sheet music, you might focus on the notes themselves, on getting your fingers to the right places. But I have to memorize everything by ear first. And when you're memorizing by ear, you notice things. You notice how one phrase connects to the next, how a crescendo builds, where the composer wants you to breathe." She placed her hands on the keys, playing a short passage from the Chopin etude they had just heard. "Listen to this section. Most people play it as just a technical run, fingers flying across the keys. But if you really listen, there's a question being asked here and an answer in the next measure." She played it again, and this time Vincent could hear what she meant. The musical phrase did sound like a question, rising and uncertain, followed by a resolution that felt like an answer. He had played those same measures hundreds of times and never noticed. "My teacher always tells me that losing my sight forced me to see music differently," Maya continued. "Every note creates a picture in my mind, but it's not a visual picture. It's more like a feeling, a texture. This note feels smooth, this one feels rough. This chord is bright red in my imagination, this one is deep blue. The students who had gathered around were listening intently. One girl raised her hand tentatively. Do you ever get scared that you'll forget where you are in a piece? Maya laughed. All the time, especially when I was younger. But I've learned to trust my muscle memory and my ear. If I do get lost, which happens sometimes, I don't panic. I listen to where I am and find my way back. It's like finding your way home in the dark. Your feet know the path even when you can't see it. Vincent sat forward in his chair. Can I ask you something else? The way you played that ending, with that specific dynamic change in the final measures, that's not how most pianists interpret it. Where did that come from? From Chopin himself, Maya said matter-of-factly. What do you mean? I read his letters in Braille, of course. He wrote about that etude, about what he was feeling when he composed it. He was homesick, missing Poland, feeling trapped in Paris even though everyone celebrated him there. That ending isn't triumphant even though it's loud. It's desperate. It's someone trying to convince themselves they're okay when they're really not. She played the ending again, and now with that context, everyone could hear the desperation she was talking about. It was all there in the music, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to truly listen. Vincent put his head in his hands. I've been playing this piece for 15 years and never knew any of that. Most people don't, Maya said kindly. They see it as a technical showpiece, something to prove how fast their fingers can move. But every piece of music is a story. You just have to be willing to listen for it. Mrs. Patterson, who had been watching from the side, stepped forward. Maya, would you be willing to play something else for us? Perhaps something you could talk through as you play, explain your thought process? Maya nodded eagerly. I'd love to. What would everyone like to hear? Several students called out suggestions. Finally, Maya settled on a Debussy prelude, one of the more lyrical pieces in the classical repertoire. This one's interesting because Debussy was all about creating impressions, painting with sound. It's perfect for showing how I think about music. She positioned her hands over the keys and began to play. But this time she talked as well, her voice soft but clear over the gentle music. This opening is like morning mist over water. Debussy wants everything soft and blurred, not sharp. So I use a lot of pedal, let the notes run into each other. Her fingers moved delicately across the keys, creating sounds that did indeed feel like morning mist. Now here, this middle section, the melody gets stronger. It's like the sun breaking through. Notice how I bring out just the top notes with my right hand while keeping the left hand quieter? That creates layers, like you're hearing two conversations at once. Vincent watched her hands carefully, noticing techniques he had never quite mastered himself. She made it look effortless, but he could see the years of practice behind every movement. Every subtle shift of weight from one finger to another. And this ending, Maya continued, slowing down the tempo even more. This is my favorite part. It's like the mist coming back, but now you remember the sunshine. You know it was there even though you can't see it anymore. That's why I play it with this particular sadness mixed with hope. The final notes faded away, and for the second time that day, the room filled with applause. But this time it was different. It wasn't just appreciation for a virtuoso performance. It was gratitude for a lesson, for being shown something new about music that most of them had never considered. Vincent stood up slowly. He walked to the piano and somewhat awkwardly extended his hand. Maya couldn't see the gesture, but she sensed something was expected. She reached out and Vincent took her hand in both of his. Thank you, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for teaching me something today. Something I should have learned a long time ago. Maya squeezed his hand. Music is for everyone, Mr. Park. It doesn't matter if you can see or not, if you learned on an expensive piano or an old keyboard in a church basement. What matters is that you love it enough to really listen. Vincent nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He had come here thinking he would be the teacher, the expert sharing his knowledge with students who needed guidance. Instead, he had been the one who needed teaching, and the lesson had come from someone he had almost dismissed entirely. Mrs. Patterson checked her watch. It's getting late, she announced, but I think we've all experienced something special today. Maya, thank you for sharing your gift with us. As students began gathering their things, talking excitedly among themselves, Vincent remained by the piano. He watched Maya carefully pack her Braille music sheets into her bag, saw the way her guide dog stood attentively, ready to help her navigate out of the building. Maya, he called out before she could leave. Wait just a moment. She turned back toward his voice, her dog guiding her back to where he stood. "Would you be willing to meet with me again?" Vincent asked. "Not as teacher and student, but as colleagues? I think I have a lot more to learn from you." Maya's face broke into a genuine smile. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Park. I think we could learn from each other." 3 weeks had passed since that day at the academy, and Vincent found himself sitting in a small practice room, waiting. He arrived 15 minutes early, something he never did. His palms were sweaty and he kept checking his phone for the time. He felt like a student again, nervous before an important lesson. The door opened and Maya entered with her guide dog. She was carrying a worn leather bag and wore a comfortable sweater and jeans. She looked relaxed while Vincent felt anything but. "Mr. Park," she called out softly. "I'm here," Vincent said, standing up. "And please call me Vincent. Mr. Park makes me sound like my father." Maya laughed. "Okay, Vincent. But only if you stop being so nervous. I can hear it in your voice." Vincent let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Is it that obvious? You're breathing faster than normal, and you keep shifting your weight from one foot to the other. My teacher does the same thing when she's anxious." Maya settled into a chair, her dog lying down beside her. "So what did you want to work on today?" Vincent sat back down at the piano bench. "Honestly, everything. I've been practicing differently since I heard you play, trying to listen more, but I feel like I'm missing something fundamental." "Show me," Maya said simply. "Play something you know well and I'll listen." Vincent thought for a moment, then began playing a Beethoven sonata, one of the most famous pieces in classical piano. He had performed it countless times, knew every note by heart. But today, playing it for Maya, he felt exposed, vulnerable. He played through the first movement, focusing on technical precision as he always had. When he finished, he waited for Maya's response. She was quiet for a moment, her head tilted slightly as if she were still processing what she had heard. "That was technically perfect," she said finally. "Every note was correct, the tempo was right, your dynamics were appropriate. But," Vincent prompted, sensing there was more. "But it felt safe, like you were reading a script instead of having a conversation. Can I ask you something? When you play that piece, what do you think about?" Vincent considered the question. "I think about finger positions, pedal timing, making sure I don't rush the difficult passages. I think about the audience, whether they're enjoying it." Maya nodded slowly. "What if I told you that's the problem? You're thinking about everything except the music itself." "I don't understand." Maya stood up and walked to the piano, her hand trailing along its side until she found the bench. "May I sit with you?" Vincent moved over and Maya sat down beside him. They were close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She placed her hands on the keys, found her position, and began playing the same Beethoven sonata. But it was completely different. Where Vincent's playing had been precise and controlled, Maya's was alive. Each phrase had intention, each note seemed to mean something. She played with her whole body, swaying with the music, her face showing every emotion the piece contained. Joy, anger, sadness, hope, all of it flowing through her fingers into the piano. When she finished the first page, she stopped and turned to Vincent. "Do you hear the difference?" "Yes," Vincent admitted. "But I don't know how you do it. Because I'm not thinking about my fingers or the audience or whether I'll make a mistake. I'm thinking about what Beethoven was trying to say. This sonata, he wrote it after he started going deaf. Can you imagine? A composer losing his hearing? That's what this music is about. It's about fear and defiance and refusing to give up even when everything seems hopeless." She played a particular passage again, a stormy section with crashing chords. "This part right here? This isn't just loud music. This is Beethoven shaking his fist at fate, screaming that deafness won't defeat him. When you play it just thinking about hitting the right keys, you miss all of that." Vincent stared at the keys, his mind racing. "I never thought about it that way. I always saw it as just music." "Music is never just music," Maya said passionately. "It's human emotion translated into sound. Every piece has a heartbeat behind it, a real person who felt something deeply enough to write it down. Your job as a pianist isn't just to play the notes. It's to feel what they felt and share that feeling with everyone listening." She stood up and let Vincent return to the center of the bench. "Try again," she said. "But this time close your eyes." "Close my eyes?" "Trust me. Close your eyes and play. Don't think about your hands. Don't think about the music stand. Just feel the music. Vincent hesitated, then closed his eyes. The darkness was disorienting at first. He realized how much he relied on sight, watching his hands, seeing the keyboard. Now, Maya said softly, think about Beethoven. Think about sitting in a room where sounds are fading, where the music you love is slipping away. Think about how angry and scared that would make you feel, and then play. Vincent placed his hands on the keys and began. At first he felt clumsy, unsure, but slowly something shifted. Without his eyes to distract him, he could hear the music more clearly. He could feel the emotion behind it. His playing became less calculated, more instinctive. The angry passages felt genuinely angry now. The gentle moments felt tender. He stopped worrying about perfection and started feeling the music, really feeling it for the first time in years. When he finished, he opened his eyes. His hands were shaking slightly. That was, he couldn't find the words. Different, Maya suggested. Terrifying, Vincent admitted, but also incredible. I felt like I was discovering the piece for the first time. Maya smiled. That's because you were. You were discovering what it means, not just what the notes are. They spent the next hour working through different pieces. Each time Maya asked Vincent to connect with the emotion behind the music. She told him stories about the composers, about what was happening in their lives when they wrote each piece. She showed him how a minor key wasn't just a technical choice, but an emotional one, how a sudden dynamic change could represent a shift in feeling. Vincent found himself playing music he had performed for years as if he had never heard it before. Everything sounded new, felt new. It was exhausting but exhilarating. During a break, Vincent asked the question that had been bothering him. Maya, how did you learn all of this? About the composers, about the emotions behind the music? My teacher, Mrs. Kim, she's been with me since I was 4 years old. After I lost my sight, she could have taught me differently, made things easier maybe. But she didn't. She said that because I couldn't see the music, I would have to understand it on a deeper level. So we studied everything. We read letters composers wrote to their families. We learned about what was happening in their lives. We talked about what each piece might mean. Maya paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the edge of the piano bench. She also told me something I've never forgotten. She said that being blind wasn't a limitation. It was a different way of experiencing the world, and that different doesn't mean less than. It just means different. Vincent was quiet, absorbing her words. I spent this whole morning being nervous about learning from you, but I think the real lesson is that I've been approaching music all wrong for years. Not wrong, Maya corrected gently. Just incomplete. Technical skill is important. You can't express emotion if you can't play the notes. But technique without emotion is like having words without knowing how to tell a story. Vincent nodded slowly. I have a concert coming up in 2 months. A big one at the Metropolitan Hall. I've been preparing the same program for weeks, but now, he gestured helplessly at the piano. Now you want to start over? Maya guessed. Maybe not start over completely, but definitely rethink everything. Would you? Vincent hesitated. Would you be willing to help me? Not as a teacher, but as a partner. We could work through the program together and you could help me find the meaning in the pieces. Maya's face lit up. Really? You'd want my help with something that important? Maya, after today, I'm not sure I can play without your help. You've shown me what I've been missing my entire career. Maya reached out and Vincent took her hand. Then yes, she said. I'd love to help, but on one condition. Anything. You have to promise me you'll stop playing it safe. No more just hitting the right notes. From now on, every time you sit at a piano, you have to feel something real. Vincent squeezed her hand. I promise. Though I have to warn you, I might not be very good at it at first. Maya laughed. That's okay. Neither was I. But that's what practice is for, right? The night of Vincent's concert at Metropolitan Hall arrived faster than he expected. 2 months of intensive work with Maya had transformed not just his playing, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be a musician. Now, standing backstage in his concert attire, he felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. His hands were trembling slightly as he adjusted his bow tie in the mirror. This was different from any performance he had ever given. The program he had chosen was the same one he had originally planned, but everything about how he approached it had changed. Every piece now carried meaning, emotion, and vulnerability he had never allowed himself to show before. There was a soft knock on his dressing room door. Come in, he called out. Mrs. Patterson entered, followed by Maya and her guide dog. Maya was wearing an elegant navy dress and she looked nervous herself. "We wanted to wish you luck before you go on," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. Vincent walked over to them, his heart pounding. "Maya, you came. I wasn't sure you'd make it. Are you kidding?" "I wouldn't miss this for anything," Maya said with a smile. "Besides, I want to hear if you actually followed through on everything we worked on, or if you chickened out at the last minute." Vincent laughed, though it came out shaky. "I'm terrified I'm going to forget everything and just revert to my old way of playing." Maya reached out and found his arm, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You won't. Trust yourself. Trust the music, and remember what we talked about. You're not performing for the audience. You're sharing something with them. There's a difference. What if they don't like it? What if they think I've lost my edge, that I'm being too emotional, too different from what they expect? Then they don't understand music," Maya said firmly. "But I think they will. I think once they hear what you're really capable of, they'll never want to listen to the old version of you again." A stage manager appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Park, 5 minutes." Vincent's stomach dropped. Mrs. Patterson gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder and guided Maya toward the door. "We'll be in the 3rd row center." "Well, I'll be watching. Maya will be listening." Maya turned back before leaving. "Vincent? One more thing." "Yes?" "Close your eyes during at least one piece. Really close them and feel it. Promise me." Vincent nodded. "I promise." They left and Vincent was alone. He could hear the murmur of the audience through the walls, the excited chatter of people taking their seats. Metropolitan Hall seated over 2,000 people, and according to his manager, tonight's show was sold out. The stage manager returned. "It's time, Mr. Park." Vincent followed him through the dimly lit backstage corridors. He could see the bright lights of the stage ahead, could hear the orchestra tuning. Tonight was a solo recital, just him and the piano. No one to hide behind, no one to share the responsibility with. As he stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. The lights were bright, almost blinding. He walked to the piano, bowed to the audience, and sat down. The applause faded and silence filled the enormous hall. Vincent looked out at the sea of faces, all waiting, all expecting the technical perfection he was known for. For a moment, panic seized him. What was he doing? Why had he changed everything? His old approach had worked perfectly fine for years. Then he saw her. 3rd row center, just as Mrs. Patterson had said. Maya was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward the stage. She couldn't see him, but somehow he felt like she knew exactly what he was thinking. He remembered her words from their first practice session together. Music is never just music. It's human emotion translated into sound. Vincent took a deep breath, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play. The first piece was a Rachmaninoff prelude, dark and moody. Instead of focusing on the technical challenges, Vincent thought about what Maya had taught him. Rachmaninoff wrote this during a period of deep depression, when he doubted his own abilities. The music was about struggling with darkness, about finding small moments of light in overwhelming shadow. Vincent let himself feel that struggle. His playing became more expressive, more raw than he had ever allowed it to be in public. He swayed with the music, let his face show the emotion he felt, and something magical happened. The audience, which usually sat politely attentive, seemed to lean forward collectively, drawn into the emotional journey he was creating. When the piece ended, there was a moment of absolute silence, then thunderous applause, but Vincent barely heard it. He was already thinking about the next piece, about the story he wanted to tell. He moved through the program, each piece a different emotional landscape, a playful Mozart sonata that captured the joy and mischief of youth, a haunting Debussy nocturne that painted pictures of moonlight and memory, a powerful Beethoven sonata that raged against fate. For the Beethoven, Vincent remembered his promise to Maya. As he began the second movement, the slow, meditative section, he closed his eyes. The darkness was still disorienting, but now it was also freeing. Without sight, he could only follow. The music. Let it guide his hands, let it flow through him rather than trying to control every aspect of it. He felt tears forming behind his closed eyelids. He was playing music the way he had always dreamed of playing it, with complete honesty and vulnerability. This was what Maya had tried to show him. This was what he had been missing for 30 years. When he opened his eyes at the end of the movement, he noticed something surprising. People in the audience were crying too. Not everyone, but scattered throughout the hall, he could see people wiping their eyes, moved by what they were hearing. The final piece of the evening was Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a sweeping, dramatic work that told a story from beginning to end. Vincent had played this piece hundreds of times, but tonight it felt different. Tonight he wasn't just playing notes. He was telling a story about love and loss, about heroism and tragedy, about the human experience in all its complexity. His fingers flew across the keys during the virtuosic passages, but now the speed served the emotion rather than just showing off technique. The quiet moments were genuinely tender. The dramatic moments carried real weight. He gave everything he had to this performance, holding nothing back. As the final chord rang out, Vincent lifted his hands from the keys and sat perfectly still. The sound faded into silence, and for several long seconds nobody moved. The entire hall seemed suspended in time. Then the audience exploded. People jumped to their feet, applauding and cheering. Some were still crying. Others were shaking their heads in amazement. The ovation went on, wave after wave of sound washing over the stage. Vincent stood and bowed, overwhelmed. This was different from any applause he had received before. This wasn't just appreciation for technical skill. This was genuine, emotional connection, people responding to the vulnerability and honesty he had finally allowed himself to show. He looked to the third row and saw Maya standing with everyone else clapping enthusiastically. Mrs. Patterson was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Even Maya's guide dog seemed caught up in the excitement, its tail wagging. Vincent bowed again, and the audience demanded an encore. He sat back down at the piano, and without announcing what he would play, he began the opening measures of the Chopin etude, the same piece Maya had played that day at the Academy, the piece that had started this entire journey. But he didn't play it the way he used to, as a technical showpiece. He played it the way Maya had taught him, with understanding and emotion. He played it as a tribute to her, to everything she had shown him about music and life. When he finished, he stood and gestured toward Maya in the audience. "I want to acknowledge someone special tonight," he said into the microphone that had been set up for encore announcements. "A young pianist who taught me more about music in 2 months than I learned in 20 years of formal training. Maya Chen, thank you for showing me what it means to truly listen." The audience applauded again, and Maya's face flushed with surprise and pride. People around her patted her shoulder, celebrating the role she had played in what they had just witnessed. Backstage after the concert, Vincent's dressing room filled with well-wishers. Critics who had reviewed his performances for years told him this was his finest work. Fellow musicians congratulated him on the transformation in his playing. His manager was ecstatic, already talking about booking larger venues and international tours. But Vincent was waiting for one person in particular. When Maya finally made her way through the crowd, guided by Mrs. Patterson, Vincent met her at the door. "Well?" he asked, suddenly nervous again. "What did you think?" Maya was quiet for a moment, and Vincent worried he had disappointed her. Then she smiled, and it was the brightest smile he had ever seen. "I think," she said softly, "that tonight you didn't just play the piano. You spoke with it. You shared your heart with 2,000 people, and they heard you. Really heard you." Vincent felt his eyes getting wet. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," Maya corrected. "The ability was always there. I just helped you find it. That takes courage, Vincent. To change everything you knew to risk being vulnerable in front of all those people. I'm proud of you." Vincent pulled her into a hug, not caring that dozens of people were watching. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me that first day, even when I was awful to you." Maya hugged him back. "Thank you for being willing to learn. Not everyone would have been." As they stood there, surrounded by the celebration and excitement, Vincent realized something profound. He had spent his entire career chasing perfection, trying to prove he was the best, the most technically skilled, the most accomplished. But none of that had brought him the joy he felt in this moment. It had taken a 17-year-old blind girl to show him what really mattered. Not perfection, but connection. Not technical mastery alone, but emotional honesty. Not performing for an audience, but sharing something real with them. Music had always been his life. But now, finally, he understood what that really meant, and he would never play the same way again.